He never missed, not once. 27 confirmed kills. No witnesses, no hesitation, no guilt. They called him the Phantom. He called himself efficient. Until one night, his target wasn't what he expected. An old man, soft voice, white beard, and on the table beside him a Qur'an. The hit was clean, but something followed him home. A verse. And do they not travel through the land so that their hearts may reason? Surah Al-Hajj 22:46. He couldn't sleep. The line kept echoing, in dreams, in mirrors, in silence. So he read the book he found in the old man's room, at first to forget, then to understand. And somewhere between ayah and sujud, the hunter became the hunted. Until one day he dropped the gun, fell to the ground, and never got up again. Press 1 if you believe no one can outrun Allah. Press 2 if you've ever felt hunted by truth. But don't look away, because what happened next, even the angels leaned in to witness. He had no real name, at least not one he used anymore. To his clients, he was a number. To the streets, a ghost. To Interpol, a silhouette with 27 unsolved cases. They called him the Phantom, and he lived like one. He didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't talk unless money was involved. His apartment was empty except for a gun safe, a burner phone, and a mattress on the floor. No photos, no mirrors, no past. Because in his world, memory got you killed. He moved through cities like a shadow, never staying more than a week. Bangkok, Istanbul, Rio, Casablanca. One shot, one clean escape. No emotions, no regrets, just precision. He had one rule: never ask why. Who the target was didn't matter. Old, young, good, evil. If the money was clean, the job got done. And it always did, until the night he met target number 28. It was a last-minute job, high payout, little information, just a name and address and one note from the client: eliminate. No collateral, no mess. He arrived just after Maghrib in a quiet suburb outside Sarajevo. Single-story home, curtains drawn, a faint scent of jasmine in the air. He slipped inside like wind through a crack, gloves on, silencer ready. The man was sitting on a prayer rug, white beard, slim frame, eyes closed, lips moving in dhikr. The hitman paused, not from hesitation, but from something else. Next to the old man sat a small table. On it, one object, a Qur'an, open, marked with a worn ribbon. The old man opened his eyes, their gazes met. No panic, no pleading, just calm. Then the old man smiled and said one line: "If it's written, then let it be written with peace." The hitman pulled the trigger, one shot, clean, silent, job done. But as he turned to leave, he glanced back and saw the Qur'an still open. Something about it unsettled him. He walked over almost involuntarily, looked down. His eyes fell on a verse highlighted faintly in pencil. "And do they not travel through the earth so that hearts may reason and ears may hear?" Surah Al-Hajj 22:46. He stared, closed the book, wiped his gloves, disappeared. But that night something followed him. Not police, not regret, something deeper. He couldn't sleep. The verse kept replaying in his mind. It wasn't the words themselves. It was the way they landed, like they knew something about him, like they were waiting for him. He flew to Morocco the next day. New job, new client. But the verse came too, on the plane, in the hallway, in the silence between his breaths. It echoed, and for the first time in years, he felt haunted. At the hotel, he opened the old man's wallet taken during cleanup as part of protocol. Inside was a photo, a younger version of the same man, surrounded by students, smiling, teaching. And tucked behind the ID card, a small note handwritten: "If I die while in prayer, let the angels carry my forehead to the soil." The hitman froze. He didn't understand why. He'd killed diplomats, bodyguards, criminals. But this was different. He looked in the mirror, but for the first time he saw a stranger looking back. That night he couldn't pick up the gun. He just sat on the mattress, gloves off, shoes still on. And for the first time in a long, long time, he thought. Not about escape plans, not about payment routes, but about truth. He opened his laptop, typed Qur'an PDF, and clicked download. He wasn't looking for guidance. He was looking for sleep, for silence, for something, anything that could drown out that verse echoing like footsteps behind him. Do they not travel through the land so that their hearts may reason? So he opened the PDF. Midnight, hotel room, gun still on the table. He expected something primitive, poetic maybe, philosophical at best. What he didn't expect was to feel seen. Indeed, those who conceal what we sent down, their hearts are hardened. Surah Al-Baqarah 2:159. He created death and life to test which of you is best in deeds. Surah Al-Mulk 67:2. They plot, but Allah is the best of planners. Surah Al-Anfal 8:30. He paused. Was this supposed to be religious comfort? Because it didn't comfort him. It confronted him. He closed the laptop, stared at the ceiling. The ceiling didn't stare back, but the verses did. By the third night, he printed the Quran, all 600 pages, bound it with black tape, marked it with a red pen. He wasn't studying, he was hunting, looking for contradiction, looking for loopholes, looking for permission to forget it. But the deeper he read, the more the book read him. He stopped working, turned down 3 jobs in a row. The handler called, demanded answers. He said he was lying low. Truth was, he hadn't picked up a weapon in 6 days. He was afraid, not of people, of what was happening inside. One morning he recited a line aloud, just to hear it. Say if you hide what is in your hearts or reveal it, Allah knows it. Surah Al-Imran 3:29. His voice cracked. He wasn't even sure why. No one was watching, no interrogation, no judge. And yet it felt like a verdict. He ran to the bathroom, splashed his face, looked into the mirror, same eyes, same jawline. But for the first time in his adult life, he looked guilty, not caught, not ashamed, just seen. He flew to Athens, not for work, just to disappear, booked a cheap flat, no guards, no gadgets, just the Qur'an, and the voice he couldn't shut up anymore. He started waking up before dawn, not to run, not to prep a mission, but to read. He didn't understand Arabic, but he read every line in English like it held instructions to rebuild a soul. One night he read Surah Al-Zumar. Say, O my servants who have wronged their own souls, do not despair of the mercy of Allah. Indeed, Allah forgives all sins. Surah Al-Zumar 39:53. He closed the book, held it against his chest, and whispered, even me. He didn't know how to pray, didn't know where Makkah was, but he stood anyway, raised his hands and lowered them, bowed, dropped to the floor, and laid his forehead on the ground. Not in sujud, not yet, but it was the first time in decades he had let anything push him downward. That night he didn't sleep, not from fear, from relief. He felt like something inside him, a locked door, an old wound was finally beginning to breathe. The next morning he called Isa. Isa wasn't a Muslim scholar. He was the name written on the back of the old man's Quran. A personal note, if I don't wake up, give this to Isa. He traced the number on the inside cover and dialed. A calm voice answered, peace be upon you. The hitman said nothing for a full 5 seconds. Then finally, he's gone. I was there, and I found the book. Silence. Then Isa replied, then maybe Allah brought you to finish his last lesson? They met in a quiet cafe just outside Thessaloniki, neutral ground. The hitman arrived early, sat near the window, Quran tucked under his coat like a loaded weapon. Isa walked in 10 minutes later. No fear, no hesitation, just warmth. The kind of warmth you can't fake, the kind that came from someone who had nothing to hide. Isa recognized him immediately, not by face, but by aura. Your eyes, he said, sitting down. They used to hunt, didn't they? The hitman didn't answer, just placed the Quran on the table. Isa looked at it, then looked at him. And now they just search. For a long time they didn't speak. They didn't have to. The Quran sat between them like an interpreter. Then finally the hitman asked, was he a scholar? Isa shook his head. No, just a man who never let go of truth even when the world stopped listening. He smiled when I raised the gun. Isa nodded. He was ready. The hitman exhaled. I didn't come to confess. I didn't come to judge. I don't know what I believe. Isa leaned forward. You're here. That's already belief in motion. They talked for hours, not about theology, not laws, not fear of hell. They spoke of mercy, of silence, of how the Qur'an didn't argue it revealed, and how sometimes the scariest thing in the world is to be told you are forgiven. The hitman blinked hard. He hated that his eyes were burning. He didn't cry, not even as a child, but something inside him was being touched without permission and without pain. He stayed in Thessaloniki for a week, met Isa every morning, listened more than he spoke. He asked about prayer, about tawbah, about what it meant to be Muslim when your hands were dirty. Isa smiled and said, "We wash. That's how we begin." On the 6th night, the hitman stood in the tiny apartment Isa had arranged for him, alone. The prayer rug was new, still creased from packaging. He laid it out gently, faced the direction Isa had shown him, and then he whispered the words Isa had taught him, slowly, deliberately. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah. He said them once, then again, and again, until they didn't sound foreign anymore, until they felt like home. He didn't fall to the floor. He lowered himself, not as a killer, not as a fugitive, but as a man who was finally ready to stop running. His forehead touched the rug, and in that single breath, everything changed. He stayed there for a long time, not saying anything, not asking anything, just listening to the silence that finally answered back. He broke his silence with one question the next day. Does it matter that I was who I was? Isa smiled. It matters only so you can know how far you've come. But with Allah, that past is gone the moment your forehead hits the earth. They prayed together, a full salah. His movements were stiff, his pronunciation flawed, but his sincerity was pure. It wrapped the room tighter than any perfect recitation. After the prayer, Isa looked at him and said, "You have a new name now." The hitman raised an eyebrow. Why? Isa shrugged. "You buried the old one in sujud. Let's not dig it up." They laughed, not loudly but like brothers. And so in a small apartment above a bakery in Thessaloniki, the phantom became Ibrahim, not to hide, but to rise. That night he looked in the mirror again, and this time he recognized the man staring back. Not because he saw himself, but because for the first time, he saw peace. For 3 months, Ibrahim lived a life that was almost normal. He walked to the masjid before Fajr, learned to say Subhanallah after prayer, started memorizing Al-Fatiha, fed pigeons in the courtyard like an old man with nothing left to prove. He even began smiling, not because life was perfect, but because for the first time he had nothing to hide. Isa visited often, sometimes for coffee, sometimes to review Qur'an, sometimes in silence just to sit beside someone who had buried his darkness and dared to live again. "You know," Isa said one evening, "you used to move like a man expecting betrayal." Ibrahim looked up. Now you move like a man waiting for forgiveness." He didn't check the door 5 times anymore, didn't sleep with a weapon under the bed, didn't flinch at sudden noises, until one morning he opened his inbox and froze. One message, no name, no greeting, just one line. "You disappeared, we didn't." Attached was a blurry photo, him outside the masjid, holding a prayer bead, smiling. He shut the laptop. Everything around him spun. The air, the walls, even the Qur'an on the table felt like it was watching. He knew this would come. No one leaves that world clean, but he had hoped. Maybe Allah would shield him. Isa arrived that afternoon. Ibrahim didn't say a word. He just handed him the phone. Isa read it, then looked up calmly. "Do you want to run?" "No." "Then we stand." Ibrahim sat at the table and held his face in his hands. "What if they come?" Isa didn't flinch. "Then we pray before they knock." That night Ibrahim did something strange. He dressed in clean white clothes, sprayed a drop of oud behind his ears, brushed his beard, then rolled out his prayer mat. Not in fear, not in panic, but in preparation. He prayed Aisha with tears in his voice, whispered ayahs he hadn't fully memorized but meant with every fiber of his being. And after the final salam, he raised his hands and made a dua he had never dared say before. Ya Allah, if they come for me, don't let me run. Let me return with my forehead on the ground. That night he slept, deep, undisturbed, like a man who had already made peace with whatever tomorrow held, and tomorrow came. It was just past Asr when the knock came at the door. Not loud, not frantic, just firm. Ibrahim stood, didn't hide, didn't shake. He looked at Isa, then said, "Whatever happens, don't fight for me. I've already surrendered." He opened the door. Two men stood outside, dark suits, expressionless faces. One of them spoke, "We need you to come with us." No badge, no introduction, just confirmation that the past had finally caught up. Ibrahim didn't resist, didn't ask where. He just grabbed his prayer beads, slipped on his shoes and said, "Give me one moment." He walked back inside, faced the Qibla, and offered 2 rak'ah. He didn't rush, didn't tremble, because this was the moment he had prayed for, not against. He finished, turned, nodded. "Let's go." As the car pulled away, Isa stood on the sidewalk, hands raised in dua. He didn't cry, didn't shout. He just whispered, "Protect him in ways we cannot see." Inside the vehicle, Ibrahim stared out the window. No regrets, no flashbacks, no fear. Only this thought repeated in his chest: whatever Allah has written is better than anything I could have planned. They took him to a building outside the city, unmarked, no logos, no sound. The kind of place he used to walk out of before others never walked again. But this time he was on the other side of the door. The men didn't say much, just led him down a corridor and into a room. Bare walls, one chair, one steel table, a folder already waiting. The older one opened it slowly and slid a photo across. It was him, not Ibrahim, the phantom. Suit, gloves, muzzle flash. They didn't ask questions. They made statements. "You disappeared after Sarajevo. You dropped off the grid. You knew your handler would come looking." He didn't flinch. Finally, the younger man leaned forward. "What happened to you?" Ibrahim met his gaze. "I was interrupted." They scoffed. "By what fear conscience?" "No," he said. "By mercy." The older man snorted. "You got religion now," he nodded. "I got Allah." For a moment, silence swallowed the room. Then the folder closed with a snap. "Here's the deal," one of them said. "We're not interested in prosecuting you. We want you back." Ibrahim's jaw tightened. "We could use a man like you. Off the books, clean, controlled." They slid a new passport across the table. New name, new cover, same darkness. The offer sat there like a loaded gun. Ibrahim reached forward and slowly turned the passport around, stared at the name. A name he hadn't used in years, a name soaked in blood. And just beneath it, a blank line labeled signature. He stood, picked up the pen, held it in his hand for a long moment, then looked up. "If I sign that, I kill the man Allah let live." He dropped the pen, turned toward the door. "You walk out that door," the older one said, "you'll be a hunted man. No protection, no peace." Ibrahim smiled softly. "You think peace is something you give me?" And with that, he walked out. Back on the street, he didn't run, didn't look over his shoulder. He just walked, head high, heart steady, like a man who had already died and been reborn. He returned to Isa just before Maghrib. Isa opened the door before he even knocked. "You're back. I never left." They prayed together, side by side. Two men who had nothing in common except what mattered most. That night, Ibrahim sat with his Qur'an in his lap, opened to Surah Ash-Shar. "Indeed, with hardship comes ease." He read it aloud, again and again. Tears blurred the ink, but his voice never cracked. He whispered, "I could have signed that name and sold my soul." Then he touched the page with his fingers and said, "But you wrote me a better one." He stayed in sujud longer than usual, face to the earth, heart in the sky. And this time he didn't ask for safety. He didn't ask for escape. He asked for acceptance. Because in a world that had once trained him to erase people, he now begged to be remembered by the one who never forgets. In a journal beside his bed, he wrote only one sentence that night: "I wasn't afraid to kill. Now I'm afraid to meet my Lord without repentance." The passport. He burned it in the sink. No smoke alarm, no second thoughts, just ashes and relief. For the first time in his life, he didn't need an identity, because he already belonged. not to a country, not to a code, but to our Rahman. 6 months later, he stood before the Kaaba, not with a crowd, not with a group, alone. Wrapped in white ihram shoulders, bare feet blistered from walking barefoot on holy ground. Ibrahim had finally arrived at the place he once believed he'd never deserved to see. The journey wasn't easy. Paperwork was tight. Visas were questioned. His past had trailed behind him like a shadow he couldn't quite outrun. But somehow, every door opened, like mercy itself had signed the approval. He walked into the Masjid al-Haram just before Fajr, eyes fixed on the Kaaba, heart trembling. This wasn't a building, this wasn't a ritual, this was a return to the one who created him and never stopped calling him back. He began tawaf, 7 rounds, each step a prayer, each breath a release. He whispered names of men he'd taken, women he'd left behind, innocence he'd never get to apologize to. Ya Allah, he said, I can't undo what I've done, but let my final breath rewrite the story. After tawaf, he prayed behind Maqam Ibrahim. 2 rak'ah, short surahs, shaking limbs. But between his bowing and rising, between every Subhan Rabbi al-Azim and Subhan Rabbi al-Ala, his soul emptied, until there was nothing left in him but truth. He stayed in sujud long after others had stood, the marble floor cool beneath his skin, his forehead pressed not just to earth, but to eternity. He didn't cry. He wept, silently, desperately. He wasn't asking for Jannah. He wasn't even asking for ease. He was asking for witness, that he came, that he bowed, that he had tried. Later that night, he walked to Mount Arafat, sat alone under the stars, back against a stone, Qur'an in his lap. He read from Surah Az-Zumar again. Say, O my servants who have transgressed against themselves, do not despair of the mercy of Allah. He looked up and whispered, I'm holding on to this, even if it's my last breath. He made dua for the souls he had wronged, for the mothers who never buried their sons, for the fathers who died not knowing why, for the little girl who had seen him once and screamed. He remembered her eyes, and he begged, Ya Allah, if you erase anything, erase that memory from her heart. He prayed Fajr on Arafat alone, then sat until the sun rose. When people began leaving, he remained. Isa had called him the night before. Brother, he said, Hajj is almost complete. After this, you will be like a newborn. Ibrahim had smiled at the thought, but inside he asked, what if Allah takes me while I'm still carrying their blood? That evening, he returned to Makkah, performed tawaf again. He didn't rush, didn't speak, didn't look around. He just walked and prayed. Don't let me die a man they feared. Let me die a man you loved. Back in his hotel room, he packed lightly. 1 Qur'an, 1 prayer rug, and the ihram he refused to take off just in case. Before sleeping, he stood for 2 rak'ah, then a 3rd, then a 4th. And in the final sujud of the night, he stayed still longer than ever. Whispered, I don't ask to live long. I ask to die right. Then he sat back, took a breath, and closed his eyes. That night he dreamed of light, nothing else, just light, and the sound of a call, echoing through a place that no longer had shadows. It was his final day in Makkah. He didn't know it, but the angels did. Ibrahim rose before dawn, earlier than usual. The hotel room was still dark, curtains closed the air, thick with a quiet he couldn't name. He washed slowly, put on his ihram one more time, folded his prayer rug, pressed his forehead against it briefly before leaving, then whispered, if this is the day, let it be, with my head bowed. At the masjid, he walked with steady steps. He found a corner near the edge of the courtyard. Not too close, not too hidden, just enough. He laid the mat down, faced the Kaaba, and prayed 2 rak'ah before Fajr. The muezzin began the call. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. His lips moved along with it, quiet, certain. He looked up at the sky. A soft blue haze had begun to bloom behind the minarets. Then Fajr began. The Imam recited Surah Al-Fajr. How fitting, Ibrahim thought. O tranquil soul. He followed every movement, no hesitation, no nerves, just presence. Then came the sujud, and he went down with grace. He didn't rise. The man beside him noticed first. A moment of stillness too long, a breath that never returned. He gently tapped him. "Brother," nothing. Then he leaned closer, touched the shoulder, still warm, still soft, but silent. He called for help. Others gathered. A small circle of men surrounded him. Some recited quietly, some cried without knowing why. The imam finished the prayer. A young boy looked over and asked his father, "Why is that man still praying?" They rolled him gently onto his side. His face was peaceful, no tension, no pain, just calm. Lips slightly parted, a whisper frozen in time. The paramedics came, but the diagnosis was already clear. He had gone, in sujood, during Fajr, in Makkah. Word spread fast, not about his past, but about his death. A man had died in prostration, facing the Kaaba, with no name, no title, no fame, just faith. They buried him that evening, behind Masjid al-Haram, wrapped in his ihram, with nothing but two witnesses, a dua, and the angels that had followed him from darkness to dawn. Isa received the news in Thessaloniki. He wept, not out of sadness, but out of awe. He opened his journal and wrote, "He used to strike from the shadows. Now he rests in the light." A few weeks later, a young man entered Isa's masjid. Tattoos down his arms, eyes tired, voice low. "I was told you knew a man named Ibrahim." Isa nodded. "He was my brother." The man swallowed. "He saved me once, years ago. Didn't kill me when he was supposed to." Isa raised an eyebrow. "Why are you here now?" The man held up a worn copy of the Qur'an. "I found this in my apartment, with a note. It just said, 'If you're reading this, it's not too late.'" Isa smiled gently. "Then welcome. You're already walking where he fell." And so the name Ibrahim began to echo where his silence once lived. Not in fear, not in contracts, but in dua. They say some people die legends, but a few, a rare few, die forgiven, and in sujud. In the end, he didn't need a gravestone, didn't need headlines, didn't need justice, because Allah gave him something far greater: redemption, a death the righteous envy, a name the angels remembered, a sujud that reached the throne of the most merciful. And the man who never missed was finally hit by Allah's mercy. Ibrahim's journey teaches us that no one is too far gone for Allah's mercy. He lived a life buried in shadows marked by blood and silence. Yet even a man like him who never missed a shot was struck by something greater truth. In the Quran, he found not condemnation, but confrontation, not despair, but a door. Through every verse, every sujud, he stripped away his past, not by forgetting it, but by surrendering it. His story reminds us repentance is not weakness, it is power. True strength is not in taking lives, but in lowering your forehead to the earth and begging the one who gave you life to rewrite your ending. And that's exactly what Ibrahim received. A death in sujud, a name written in mercy, in a story that will outlive him, not because he was feared, but because he finally chose to be forgiven. May we all bow before we're brought down. He ran the South Side like he owned it. Guns, power, loyalty, and fear. They called him King Dre, not because he was noble, but because no one dared to look him in the eye. Until prison, until four walls stripped away the thrones and lies, until someone handed him a book and said, "Bet you can't finish this." It wasn't a threat, it was a dare. But it felt like destiny, because that night, he cracked open the Quran like he cracked open safes. And what he found inside, it broke him, then rebuilt him. He began leading prayers in the same voice that used to order beatdowns. He fell in love with every ayah like it was written just for him. And just days before his release, he entered sujud and never got back up. Press 1 if you believe no one's too far gone. Press 2 if you've seen a heart change in a place of chains. But whatever you press, don't leave yet, because this story is what mercy really looks like. Before the orange jumpsuit, before the tasers, the courtrooms, and the prayer rug, they called him King Dre. Not because he ruled kindly, but because nobody crossed him and walked away clean. Southside Chicago didn't need mayors, it needed survivors. And Dre was one of the last ones standing. At 29, he ran 3 blocks, 5 crews, and a reputation built on fear. He spoke, people listened. He snapped, people scattered. His body was marked not with tattoos of flowers or poetry, but with names, dates, and blood. He had enemies in every direction, but not one dared say his name unless they whispered it. King Dre. He didn't believe in anything he couldn't hold. Money, respect, revenge. He had heard about religion. His grandmother used to mutter prayers into the sink while scrubbing blood from his shirts. But Dre he called all of it weakness. Gotti used to laugh. If he was real, he left this neighborhood a long time ago. Then came the bust. Undercover cops, wiretaps, guns found in the back of his car, coke in the walls of his apartment. It wasn't the first time he got arrested, but it was the first time he realized he wasn't getting out. They put him in Cook County Jail. Gray walls, gray food, gray air, but inside things were quieter, too quiet. For a man used to shouting orders, the silence was like a slow punishment. His crew stopped visiting after the third week. His girl moved on by the fifth. And by the second month, he stopped looking at the clock altogether. That's when it happened. In the prison library, a place he went just to stretch his legs and avoid fights. Someone left a book on his seat. Black, plain, no cover design, no flashy font. Just one title dead center. The Qur'an English translation. He looked around. No one claimed it. He picked it up, flipped a page, and a voice behind him said, "You won't get past 10 pages. It'll confuse you." Dre turned. A young dude, maybe 25, dark beard, soft eyes. Inmate, Muslim. "I'm not trying to read this," Dre snapped. The man shrugged. "Didn't say you were. Just saying, most people don't get far." He turned to leave but stopped. "Unless it was meant for you." Dre stared at the book in his hands. It was heavier than he expected. That night he opened it in his cell. Not because he cared, not because he believed, but because someone told him he couldn't. That was enough. He read the first verse aloud. "In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate." He smirked. "Mercy where still," he kept reading. Something strange happened. The verses weren't like other books. They didn't tell stories. They spoke, as if the book wasn't written to people, but at him. This is the book about which there is no doubt a guidance for those conscious of Allah. Guidance. He scoffed, but he didn't close the book. He stayed up for hours, turning pages, pausing, reading the same sentence 10 times. It wasn't a story, it was a mirror. And for the first time in his life, he didn't like what he saw looking back. He closed the book, sat still, looked at his hands. The same hands that had held pistols, broken jaws, pressed cash into palms like gods. Now they trembled, just a little, but it was enough. The next day he returned to the library, same seat, same book. Only this time he didn't need a dare. He returned the next morning, not to the yard, not to the weight bench, to the library, same seat, same book. But this time the man with the calm eyes was already waiting. "You came back," he said, no smile, just acknowledgement. Dre didn't answer, just opened the Quran slowly like it might bite him. The man sat beside him. For a few minutes they said nothing. Then Dre spoke. "Who wrote this?" The man didn't hesitate. "Allah." Dre rolled his eyes. "No, I mean like the author. Who's the actual guy?" "No guy," he replied softly. "It was revealed, word for word, to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him." Dre stared at the page. "Man, this ain't like any Bible I ever skimmed. It's not even linear. It's not supposed to be." The man said, "It's not telling a story. It's telling your story." That made Dre look up. "What's your name?" "Isa." "Like Jesus?" Isa nodded. "Exactly like Jesus." They started meeting every morning, not because Dre trusted him, but because the verses kept following him into sleep, into meals, into dreams. They weren't just words on paper. They were inside him now. "Why do y'all keep saying peace be upon him every time you say Muhammad?" Dre asked one day. Isa shrugged. "Respect." "Man, I don't even say that about my own mama." Isa smiled. "Then maybe she deserves it too." Dre shook his head, but something in that answer stuck. One night, lights out came early. Dre lay awake staring at the ceiling, the Quran resting on his chest. His cellmate snored in the bunk below. He opened to the verse he'd marked earlier. "Indeed, Allah will not change the condition of a people until they change what is in themselves. Surah Ar-Ra'd 13:11. He read it, then read it again. He sat up, swung his legs over the side of the bed, put the book down, looked at his own hands. They'd been stained with everything blood, sin, betrayal. He whispered, "What if I can't change?" The silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt like something was listening. The next morning, Isa found him already in the library. Dre didn't greet him, just said, "You really think God talks to people like me?" Isa didn't blink. He talked to Pharaoh. He talked to Iblis. But most of all, he talks to the broken. They began talking more after that, not just about the Qur'an, but about life, about childhood, about mistakes, about how Dre had learned to command a room at age 15 because fear was the only currency anyone respected. But when everyone fears you, he said, one morning you're still alone. Isa didn't answer. He just handed Dre a pocket-sized book. Thin, soft cover, selected surahs for Salah. "What's this for when you're ready to talk back?" That night, Dre opened it and read, "Guide us to the straight path." He repeated it slowly. Guide us to the straight path. He didn't know how to pray, didn't know if he had the right, but something in him wanted to bow. A few days later, a new inmate entered Dre's cell block. Young, loud, trying to impress the older heads. He looked at Dre, didn't recognize him. "Told me King Dre used to run the South Side." "You for real?" Dre stared back calmly. "Not anymore." The kid laughed. "What, you a preacher now?" "No," Dre said, standing. Then slowly, "But I might be a servant." Back in the library, Dre asked Isa, "If I wanted to pray, like, for real, how do I start?" Isa didn't hesitate. "We make wudu. Then I show you how to stand, bow, and put your face where it belongs." Dre raised an eyebrow. "On the ground." "Exactly. That's where hearts get cleaned." That night in the corner of his cell, Dre washed his hands with bottled water, stood facing the back wall, raised his hands. He didn't know the Arabic yet, didn't recite full surahs, but he whispered, "God, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm here. Guide me." Then he bowed, and something in him broke, not like a bone, but like a dam. By now, everyone in the block had noticed something had changed. Dre wasn't shouting anymore, didn't argue over TV time, didn't walk like the king of anything. He still looked the same: broad shoulders, faded tattoos, scars like road maps across his hands. But something softer had settled in his eyes, something that made people lower their voices around him. Every morning after breakfast, he and Isa sat near the library shelves. One Qur'an between them, one book of Salah instructions beside it. Dre hated following, hated being told what to do. But this was different. He wasn't submitting to Isa. He was learning to submit to something higher. And that didn't feel like weakness. It felt like coming home. "Your body has bowed for years," Isa told him one day, "to money women fear. Now bow to the one who created you, even with all the stuff I've done, especially because of it." That night, Dre performed wudu without help, rolled out his mat in the corner of the cell. His cellmate didn't say a word, just turned over and faced the wall. Dre stood barefoot, raised his hands. "Allahu Akbar," he whispered. Then he bowed, then lowered himself fully, forehead to the floor. For the first time in his life, his body was lower than his pride. And it didn't feel humiliating. It felt safe, like he was finally in the one place no one could shoot him, curse him, or betray him. His whisper came like a breath from deep inside. "Forgive me." And though the cell was silent, he felt like someone had heard. From that day, Salah became a habit. Not always perfect, not always fluent, but sincere. 5 times a day, every day. Even the guards noticed. One asked him, "You join a cult or something?" Dre smiled, folding his mat. "Nah, man, I just woke up." One evening, Isa brought him a miswak and a small bottle of attar. Dre raised an eyebrow. "What's this for?" "For Jumu'ah, Friday prayer, in here in the chapel. They let us gather once a week." Dre had never been inside that room, figured it was only for preachers and people pretending to be holy to cut their sentences. But Friday came, and Isa woke him early. "Let's go. You're one of us now." The walk to the prison chapel was quiet. Inmates in white kufis, some young, some old. No loud jokes, no flexing, just footsteps. As they entered the chapel, Dre froze. It wasn't the carpet, or the circle of men sitting quietly in a line. It was the smell. Oud, clean sweat, humility. It smelled like something ancient, like something pure. The khutbah was simple, a reminder about death, about repentance, about how Allah forgives even those who have drowned in sin, so long as they rise before their final breath. Dre didn't blink the entire time. When they stood to pray, he stood in the second row. Between a man who used to run heroin and a man doing 25 to life for arson. Yet for the first time, Dre didn't feel out of place. When the salah began and the imam called Allahu Akbar, Dre felt his heart respond. Not his brain, not his mouth, his heart. As if it had been waiting to hear those words since the day it first beat. He followed every movement. This time not with hesitation, but with peace. The rhythm of standing, bowing sujud. It washed through him like waves smoothing jagged stone. By the final tashahhud, he wasn't King Dre. He wasn't even Dre. He was nothing. And it was in being nothing that he finally felt full. After the prayer, Isa squeezed his shoulder. You good Dre couldn't speak. He just nodded, eyes blinking away, a flood that hadn't yet come. Back in his cell, he lay on his back, staring at the ceiling. He thought of all the men he had hurt, all the brothers he'd lost, all the nights he should have died, and all the nights Allah kept him alive anyway, not to punish him, but to bring him to this prayer, to this bowing, to this mercy. He whispered into the dark, "Thank you for not ending me when I deserved it." Then he fell asleep. And for the first time in decades, he didn't dream of gunshots or sirens. He dreamed of light and the sound of Qur'an echoing from somewhere inside his chest. The decision didn't come all at once. There wasn't thunder, no dream, no lightning bolt from the sky, just a quiet build like water gathering behind a dam. And when it finally broke, it wasn't noise that came out. It was truth. It was Isa who asked the question one afternoon after Dur. They were seated on the floor near the chapel wall, backs against the cool concrete, the smell of prayer mats and old wood between them. Isa looked over. "So, when are you going to say it?" Dre didn't pretend not to know. "The Shahada," he said softly. Isa nodded. "You believe. You pray. You've already submitted." Dre paused. "I've said it to myself, man, like in my cell." Isa smiled. "Now say it to the heavens." That night, Dre couldn't sleep. He walked circles in his cell, paced between the sink and the bars, opened the Qur'an, closed it, opened it again. He wasn't nervous about the words. He'd memorized them weeks ago. He wasn't scared of the inmates watching. He'd faced down bullets and betrayal. What shook him was the idea that this wasn't just a line. It was a contract with Allah. The next Jumu'ah, Isa told the imam. The message spread like wind through the chapel. The former gang boss was becoming Muslim. The prayer hall was fuller than usual. Even men who didn't usually come to Friday prayer showed up and sat quietly. Some out of respect, some out of curiosity, a few out of disbelief. Dre walked in wearing a borrowed white thobe. Clean, crisp, his kufi slightly crooked. He looked uncomfortable but unshakable. The imam stood beside him and raised his hand. "Brothers," he said, "today we witness a soul return to its creator." The room grew still. No chains, no bars, no past. Just a man of prayer rug and the weight of eternity leaning in. Dre took a breath, then said with tears clinging to the edges of his voice, "Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah." Silence. Then someone wept. Then someone whispered, "Allahu Akbar." Then the whole room echoed it. Allahu Akbar, over and over, like the walls themselves were repeating it. Dre's eyes flooded, his knees gave way, and he fell not in defeat but in sujud. They helped him up gently. No one mocked, no one laughed. They knew what they had witnessed. A man who used to run blocks now walked in the footsteps of prophets. That night, Dre returned to his cell with a new name, Abdur Rahim, servant of the Most Merciful. He wrote it on a scrap of paper and taped it to the wall above his bunk. His cellmate stared at it. "Man, what's all this about?" Dre just smiled. It's the name I was always supposed to have. Over the next few weeks, he changed even more. He began leading Salah when Isa was sick, taught other inmates how to make wudu, requested books on tafsir in Arabic. The guards didn't understand it. They called it prison religion, said it would wear off when he got out. But they didn't see the nights, the tears on the rug, the sujood that lasted until his knees ached. This wasn't a phase, this was a return. He wrote letters to his old crew, not to boast, but to apologize. He told them he wasn't their king anymore, told them they were chasing shadows. Power doesn't make you strong, he wrote. Bow down and you'll find who you really are. Only one replied, a short note. If you're serious, then pray for me too. And he did, every night, by name. One afternoon after Asr, Isa sat beside him again. Remember the day you asked if God talks to people like you? Yeah, Dre replied. Isa smiled. He's been talking this whole time. You just finally stopped interrupting. Dre chuckled. Guess I did. Then his voice turned soft. I'm getting out in 3 weeks. Isa nodded. You ready for the world? I'm ready for the prayer rug. The rest can wait. The news came on a Tuesday. Paperwork cleared, behavioral reviews passed, sentence reduction approved. Abdur Rahim had exactly 21 days until he'd walk free. For most inmates, that kind of news felt like air returning to the lungs. For Abdur Rahim, it felt heavier than expected. He didn't fear release. He feared returning to the world that had once owned him. Isa clapped him on the back when he heard, Mashallah, man, you're almost out. But Abdur Rahim just looked down at his prayer mat. What if the world out there pulls me back? Isa smiled gently. Then stay bowed. The ground never pulls. Those final 3 weeks moved fast. Every day he prayed with more focus. Every night he read the Qur'an slower, like he wasn't just reading to understand, but reading to say goodbye. Other inmates asked him questions now. How to pray, what to say before sleep, what the word Rama really meant. He answered every one. He wasn't just a student anymore. He had become a witness. The warden even asked him to lead Friday prayer. It'll look good on your record, he said. But when the time came, Abdur Rahim didn't do it for appearances. He stood in the front row, placed his hand on his heart, and began the Khutbah, brothers. I was a man who walked with guns on his hip and rage in his chest, but Allah took all of that and replaced it with something I didn't know I needed: peace. He paused mid-sermon, looked across the faces of men who'd stabbed, stolen, smuggled. Some had killed, but all of them were listening, because he wasn't preaching. He was bleeding truth onto the floor. After the prayer, one inmate approached him in tears. I used to hate you, man. You were everything I resented. Now I want what you have. Abdur Rahim hugged him without hesitation. You already have it, brother. You just need to believe it. By the second week, the guards stopped calling him by his last name. Even they started saying Rahim. Some nodded as he passed. A few even asked him to pray for my mother or keep my son in your du'as. He didn't gloat. He just wrote every name down in a little notebook and mentioned them in sujood each night. He fasted Mondays and Thursdays. He gave away his dessert tray. He wrote long letters to people he'd hurt, asking nothing in return. Something was happening inside him, not loud, but real. One night, Isa entered his cell and found him on the floor, hands shaking. Brother Isa whispered. Abdur Rahim didn't look up. He was crying, openly. I'm scared, he said, of what that I'll get out and mess it up, that I'll let Allah down, that I'll forget who I became in here. Isa knelt beside him. You won't forget. You didn't become a man of Allah because of this cell. You became one because of who you bowed to inside it. That night, his sujood was longer than usual. He whispered names, prayers, regrets. Then finally, let me leave with you. Not from you. 2 days before his release, he woke up before Fajr, earlier than usual. Heart pounding, he performed wudu with care, put on his best clothes, brushed his teeth with miswak, applied a drop of attar Isa had gifted him, and then he walked slowly to the chapel. Only 2 men were there. He laid his mat down in the first row and stood. Allahu Akbar. This time there was no rush. Every movement was deliberate, every bow full of meaning. He whispered Surah Al-Fatiha with trembling lips, recited a short surah, one he had memorized with effort. Then he bowed, then lowered into sujood. His forehead touched the ground, and he stayed there. One breath, then another. Then, nothing. The two men behind him noticed first. They rose from ruku, but Abdur Rahim didn't move. Still, folded, still. They waited, then leaned forward and realized he wasn't praying anymore. He was home. The news spread through the prison like wind through trees, quiet at first, then unstoppable. Abdur Rahim died in sujood, 2 days before freedom, during Fajr, facing the Qibla, whispering Qur'an. The man once known as King Dre, the man who once ruled corners with bloodied fists, had left this world in the most honored of ways. The guards didn't know what to say. Some thought it was a setup. Others just shook their heads and whispered, Subhanallah. The warden stood at the doorway of the chapel that morning watching the brothers gather. They wrapped his body with care, washed him with the same hands he once taught to punch. Tears fell not just from inmates but from officers. This wasn't just a prisoner. This was a shaheed in their eyes. Isa led the janazah, voice breaking with each takbir. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi rajiun. He paused longer than usual after the final salam, hands raised, palms trembling. Then he whispered, he bowed once for power and again for fame, but this last time, he bowed only for Allah. They buried him in the prison cemetery. A small plot. No family came. No name etched in stone. Just a wooden sign, Abdur Rahim, servant of the most merciful, for days after inmates walked quieter, prayed deeper, fought less. The air in the block had changed. It wasn't fear, it was awe, because they had seen with their own eyes what most only read in books, a man transformed. One of the roughest inmates, known as Slim, approached Isa a few days later. He didn't make eye contact, but he spoke low. I want what he had. Isa nodded. You know how it starts. Slim looked up. Isa smiled. You bow. More brothers joined prayer, even men who hadn't believed in anything for decades. One brought out an old Qur'an from under his mattress. Another started fasting. Another learned Surah Al-Fatiha by heart and recited it in tears the first time he stood in Salah. The guards took notice too. One officer who had once called Rahim a born criminal began leaving dates in the library every Friday. Another stopped cursing near the prayer area. No one asked him why. They all knew. Isa wrote a letter to a local imam on the outside, told him everything, every verse Dre had loved, every dua he whispered, every sujood he made last longer than the rules allowed. The imam read the letter aloud at a Friday khutbah, then wept. After Jumu'ah, 3 young men came forward and took shahada that same day. None of them had known Abdur Rahim, but his return to Allah brought them to the truth. Isa kept Rahim's old prayer mat, folded neatly, cleaned with rose water. Every Friday he placed it beside his own. No one sat on it. It was saved, honored, respected, not for a relic, but for a reminder that no matter how far you fall, sujood can raise you higher than a throne ever could. One afternoon, months later, a new inmate arrived, young, angry, covered in gang ink. Isa approached him slowly. You got a name? The kid looked up. Isa's eyes softened. He reached into his bag and handed him a worn black book. Ever read this? The kid scoffed. I ain't religious, Isa grinned. Neither was the last king who held it. That night in his cell, the boy opened the Qur'an. First out of boredom, then curiosity, then something else entirely. He read one verse, then another, then closed the book and whispered, what if this is real? And somewhere far away beneath a patch of grass under a nameless tree, Abdur Rahim's prayer echoed one more time, pulling another lost soul toward the light. The wind moved gently through the prison yard. No shouting, no noise. Just the quiet hum of footsteps and unspoken thoughts. It had been 2 months since Abdur Rahim left the world in sujood, but in every hallway, every corner of the block, he was still there. His old cell had become a place of silence. Inmates passed it slowly now, not out of fear, but respect. No one asked to move in. Even the guards left the door closed longer than usual. Isa sometimes stood there after Fajr, leaning against the frame, whispering dhikr under his breath. One Friday, the warden invited a Muslim chaplain from outside to lead the sermon. Halfway through the khutbah, he stopped. I heard, he said, voice steady, that a man died here in Sujud, a man who used to lead men into fire, but died leading them to light. And in that room full of locked hearts and second chances, grown men wipe tears with calloused hands. They say you die twice, once when your soul leaves your body, and again when your name is spoken for the last time. But Abdur Rahim's name kept moving, like a prayer whispered by wind, like mercy that refused to be buried. Outside, things changed too. One of the guards who watched him pray every night eventually bought a Qur'an, read it slowly, quietly, then stood outside a masjid one night and just watched the worshippers come and go. He didn't go in, not yet, but he whispered to himself, I want what that inmate had. In a halfway house on the west side, a former crew member of Dre's read the last letter Rahim sent him over and over. He used to roll his eyes at religion. Now he carried Rahim's words in his pocket. Power isn't making people fear you. Power is standing before Allah and not trembling in shame. He hadn't prayed yet, but every night before bed he looked up at the ceiling and whispered, Ya Rahman, guide me. In a masjid across town, a boy stood after Jumu'ah and asked to recite a surah he had memorized. The imam nodded. The boy stood proudly and recited Qul huwallahu ahad Allahu samad. It was Surah Al-Ikhlas, the first chapter Rahim had ever memorized. And the imam, wiping a tear, whispered, he taught that to someone, I'm sure of it. Rahim had no funeral on livestream, no YouTube lecture, no video tribute. But he had something more powerful. He had impact, not in followers, but in footsteps, the kind that others quietly trace without ever knowing who walked there first. Isa still kept Rahim's prayer mat, still placed it beside his own on Fridays. One day he finally let someone else pray on it, a new brother, tattooed, hardened, but humble. The man hesitated. I don't want to step where someone so righteous bowed. Isa smiled. He wasn't righteous his whole life. He just made sure to die while trying. That night, Isa sat under the stars, his back against the yard wall. He looked up at the night sky and whispered, Ya Allah, if I could see him one more time, I wouldn't even say a word. I'd just tell him you made it. They buried him without a crowd, without flowers, but not without love, because love doesn't need a ceremony. It just needs sincerity and sujud. And so the man once feared as King Dre was remembered not for the weight of his fists, but for the weight of his repentance. Not for the lives he'd hurt, but for the hearts he helped heal. And not for the blocks he ruled, but for the moment he bowed and never rose again. If you walk past a nameless grave behind a prison wall, don't just look. Bow your head, because there lies a man who walked through fire and returned to the most merciful, not clean, but forgiven. And that is more than enough. Abdur Rahim's story is a reminder that no soul is beyond redemption. In a world that often defines people by their worst mistakes, he found his truest self by surrendering not to power, but to Allah. His transformation wasn't loud, but it was real. It came through quiet prayer, a trembling forehead in sujud, and a heart broken open by the Qur'an. He lived a life many would fear and died the way many believers pray for, in submission, in peace, in the presence of his Lord. His journey proves that change is always possible, no matter how dark the past. It only takes one step, one prayer, one sincere bow to begin again. And sometimes the greatest legacy is not fame, but the silent ripple of someone who found truth and died holding on to it. May we all live with that kind of sincerity and return with that kind of ending.